$1.2 million. That's what Rochelle Dunbar, HOA board president, self-appointed neighborhood dictator, and a woman who once made a 73-year-old man repaint his shutters twice in the same week, decided my property was worth fining. Not for a crime, not for a flood, not for anything that touched a single one of my neighbors' lives. For a mailbox post, painted the wrong shade of beige. She showed up at my door with that letter, pressed khakis, HOA polo, and a look on her face like she'd already won. She hadn't. See, while Rochelle was writing me fines, I was reading my deed. And buried in that deed was something she never knew existed, something that meant I didn't just own my house, I owned hers. What would you do if your neighbor handed you $1 million fine over a color swatch? And where are you watching from? Because I need to know if this kind of petty tyranny is local or national. To understand why that letter hit different, you need to understand what this land actually is. Herons Creek Estates sits in rural suburban Georgia, about 40 minutes outside Athens, the kind of neighborhood where the lawns look immaculate and the politics are uglier than a foreclosure auction. Brick mailboxes, American flags, pickup trucks in driveways next to minivans, the kind of place that looks like a Norman Rockwell painting, until you attend one HOA meeting and realize it's actually a low-budget reality show with worse lighting. I'm Garrett Hollis, 54 years old, licensed electrician, part-time land surveyor, full-time person who does not enjoy being told what to do by someone whose only qualification is owning a laminator and too much free time. I bought my lot in 2003. 2.5 acres of red Georgia clay, oak trees, and the kind of quiet that takes 20 years to earn. The smell of that land in summer, fresh-cut fescue mixed with iron-rich soil, thick enough to taste at the back of your throat. That smell meant something to me before I ever broke ground. Because my father, Harold Hollis, had worked that same dirt since 1971. He built a hunting cabin on this parcel before the subdivision existed, before the streets had names, before anyone had thought to form a committee about it. I built the house myself over 3 years, weekends, evenings, every beam plumb, every wire run clean, every piece of trim cut twice and installed once. The crunch of gravel under my boots every morning walking the perimeter, that sound was mine. This place was mine. Then Rochelle Dunbar got a laminator. She moved in around 2015, late 50s, always in pressed khakis and a polo shirt with the HOA crest embroidered on the chest like a military rank she'd awarded herself in the bathroom mirror. She wore enough floral perfume that you could smell her coming from 2 driveways away, sweet and aggressive, like a magnolia that had decided to file a grievance. Within 2 years, she was on the HOA board. Within 3, she was president. And in the winter of 2020, while the rest of us were just trying to get through the year intact, Rochelle was in her home office writing a 47-page document she called the Community Aesthetic Standards. 47 pages. For a residential neighborhood in Georgia. She presented it to the board, herself and 2 others she'd personally recruited, in January 2021. No community vote. No public notice beyond a single flyer tucked under windshield wipers on a Tuesday afternoon. Just a stamp, a seal, and a retroactive application to every structure in Herons Creek Estates, including structures that predated the HOA itself, including mine. The first citation arrived that March. My mailbox post, which I'd painted colonial ivory in 2004, per the guidelines that existed at the time, was now non-compliant. The new standard required antique bisque, a color that existed in exactly 1 brand of exterior paint, sold at exactly 1 hardware store 2 towns over, that happened to be owned by Rochelle's brother-in-law. Fine, $75. The citation notice came in a cream-colored envelope with the HOA seal pressed into the flap, the kind of formality designed to make you feel small before you even open it. I paid it. I bought the paint. I repainted the post. 3 weeks later, another citation. The post was now non-compliant in dimension, 4 inches too tall, per a regulation that hadn't existed when I installed it. Fine, $150. My wife Deanna, a school librarian with the patience of a saint and the memory of a tax auditor, opened a spreadsheet. She didn't say much. She just labeled the first tab Evidence and started typing. That spreadsheet would eventually run to 11 tabs and help bring down an entire homeowners association. But we weren't there yet. By winter of 2021, what had started as a nuisance had become a pattern, and patterns, once you see them, are very hard to unsee. I replaced the mailbox post entirely. New wood, correct height to the millimeter, correct color per Rochelle's own document. I photographed it from 4 angles with a timestamp. I emailed the photos to the full HOA board with a signed letter confirming the remediation. I kept a copy. Deanna logged it. 2 weeks later, a new citation arrived. The replacement post had been installed without a minor exterior modification permit, which required a $200 application fee and a 90-day board review period. Running total, $75, plus $150, plus $200, plus a $50 late processing charge that appeared in the fine with no supporting clause cited, $475. For a mailbox post that was, by every measurable standard, exactly what they'd ask for. I want to be clear about something. I was not a man on the edge. I was a man taking notes. The following Saturday, my neighbor Walt Osgood came by while I was splitting firewood. Walt is 68, retired pipe fitter, the kind of man who fixes his own truck in the driveway on Sunday morning and doesn't apologize to anyone for the sound. He had an envelope in his hand, same cream color, same embossed seal. His citation was for a horseshoe hung above his garage door. Cast iron, slightly rusted, the kind of thing his grandfather had nailed up there as decoration, sometime around 1987. Under the new aesthetic standards, it was classified as unsanctioned exterior ornamentation. We stood there in the smell of lighter fluid and hickory smoke from his grill, a couple of sweet teas sweating in the July heat, reading our citations side by side. And then I noticed something. Both citations reference properties purchased before 2007. Walt bought in 1999. I bought in 2003. The newer homes on the east side of the development, the ones built after the HOA formally incorporated, weren't getting letters. That wasn't a coincidence. That was targeting. I filed a records request with the HOA for their complete citation log, citing Georgia's Open Records Act. It's a straightforward mechanism. Public bodies and organizations that function with quasi-governmental authority over citizens are generally required to produce their records on request. The HOA had 45 days to comply. Practical insight. If your HOA is issuing fines and you suspect a pattern, request their full citation log in writing, citing your state's Open Records or Public Records Act. You don't need a lawyer to file the request, and what you find might surprise you. The next HOA board meeting was held in Rochelle's sunroom, which, again, was itself a power move. 4 chairs on the board side of a folding table, 12 chairs for residents. The geometry of the room told you exactly what Rochelle thought of the people she governed. I brought a manila folder. I sat down. I waited. When Rochelle opened the floor for comments, I raised my hand and asked one question in front of everyone in that room. Can you show me the recorded vote in the meeting minutes where residents approved the 2021 Aesthetic Standards document? Rochelle said the board had the authority to adopt standards without a general vote. I asked under which specific section of the CC and Rs that authority was granted. She said she'd have to follow up. She never did. But a woman in the 3rd row wrote something down. Phyllis Kowalczyk, retired county clerk, reading glasses hanging around her neck like a professional credential. A small notepad that she handled with the quiet efficiency of someone who had spent 2 decades making official records of things people wished hadn't been said out loud. She wrote it down and capped her pen with a small, deliberate click. I left without another word. I didn't need to win that meeting. I needed to plant the question where witnesses could hear it. 2 weeks later, Rochelle cited my driveway for encroaching on the HOA common area easement, allegedly by 3 inches, per a survey she'd commissioned without board authorization from a firm she'd hired unilaterally. Fine, $1,500. I pulled my original 2003 deed and property survey. My driveway was exactly where it had always been. The HOA's survey was wrong, or worse. Deanna added a new column to the spreadsheet. She labeled it possible fraud with a question mark. She wouldn't need the question mark for long, because while I was reviewing that deed, looking for the property line, I found something else entirely. A clause, old language, from 1989, before the subdivision was ever platted. I didn't fully understand it, so I photographed it and emailed it to a real estate attorney named Douglas Fitch, a former classmate from the University of Georgia, who now handled property disputes out of Savannah, and had the reputation of a man who read every word of every document he touched. Douglas called back within the hour. His voice had a quality I recognized, the careful, measured tone of a lawyer who has just seen something that changes everything. "Garrett," he said, "where exactly did you get this deed?" January 2022. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. Terry, the postman who'd been running this route for 11 years, handed it to me at the end of my driveway, with a look that said he'd been delivering bad news long enough to recognize the envelope. This one was thick. I signed for it, walked back up the gravel drive, went inside, and opened it at the kitchen table. 14 pages. From a mid-tier Atlanta law firm called Hargrove and Pell, retained by the HOA. They had audited, retroactively, every alleged violation on my property dating back to 2007, when the HOA incorporated. They had applied the compounding penalty clause buried in the CC and RS, 12% annually on outstanding fines. Total assessed, $1,247,800, payment due in 60 days. After that, they would file a lien on my property. Deanna read it over my shoulder. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she went to the refrigerator, poured herself a glass of water, sat back down, and opened her laptop. She added a new tab to the spreadsheet. She titled it, "The Big One." I folded the letter, poured more coffee, and said, "Well, now I'm interested." Word moves fast in an 84-home neighborhood. By Friday, half of Herons Creek knew about the letter. The reactions split almost perfectly along the fault line I'd already noticed. The older residents who'd been here before the HOA incorporated were horrified. The newer arrivals, particularly those who'd moved in after 2015, whose property values benefited from strict aesthetic enforcement, were more complicated about it. Rochelle called an emergency board meeting. She framed the letter as a necessary escalation, following years of what she called willful non-compliance. She used the phrase community standards 11 times in 20 minutes. I counted because Phyllis texted me the transcript she'd taken in shorthand, because of course she had. A younger homeowner named Trevor Bassett stood up. 34 years old, software contractor, 2 years in the neighborhood, genuinely believed the HOA improved his investment. He said publicly that if someone refused to follow the rules, they deserved the consequences. The room largely agreed with him, or at least didn't argue. I wasn't at that meeting. I was in Douglas Fitch's office in Savannah, sitting across a mahogany desk that smelled of old paper and strong coffee, watching a very careful lawyer lay out 3 documents in a row. My 1989 original land grant, my 2003 deed of purchase, the HOA's 2007 incorporation filing with the state of Georgia. Douglas walked me through it slowly, the way you explain something important to someone you want to make sure understands it completely before they react. The original 1989 land grant, issued to my father, Harold Hollis, from the estate of the Whitmore family, who'd owned the original 400-acre tract, contained a non-encumbrance clause. Specific, recorded, legally binding language that prohibited any future homeowners association from levying fees or assessments against the property without the express written consent of the original grantee or their direct heirs. My father was the original grantee. I was his direct heir. The HOA had incorporated in 2007 and levied assessments and fines against my property for 15 years, without ever obtaining my consent, without ever disclosing the clause existed. Every fine, every assessment, every citation, legally void. Douglas let that land for a moment before continuing. The 2007 incorporation filing, the document Rochelle had submitted to the state of Georgia to formally establish the HOA as a legal entity, required signed consent forms from every affected property owner within the development. The filing listed those consents as obtained, including mine. Douglas slid a photocopy across the desk. A signed consent form, dated October 2007, bearing the name Garrett Hollis. I looked at it for a long time. "That's not my signature," I said. "No," Douglas said. "It isn't." He'd already ordered a forensic document analysis through a firm in Atlanta that specialized in contract and estate fraud. He didn't tell me the results yet. The analysis wasn't complete. But he told me what he suspected. The ink, the signature formation, the date, none of it was likely to hold up under examination. Someone had forged my name on a state filing to complete an HOA incorporation that legally couldn't proceed without my consent. I sat back in the chair. Outside Douglas's window, Savannah was going about its afternoon. Traffic, river smell drifting up from the waterfront, pigeons on a ledge. Ordinary Tuesday things. How long to be sure? I asked. 3 weeks, Douglas said. Then let's be sure, I said. The forensic analysis came back in February. 3 weeks, as promised. The conclusion was unambiguous. The signature attributed to Garrett Hollis on the 2007 HOA consent form did not match any authenticated sample of my actual signature. The ink composition dated to approximately 2009, 2 full years after the supposed signing date. The letter formation was inconsistent with my documented handwriting across 6 comparison samples Douglas had collected from public filings, contracts, and permit applications. Someone had forged my signature, filed it with the state of Georgia, used it to complete a legal incorporation that couldn't have proceeded otherwise, and they'd done it sloppily enough to get caught. Douglas filed a formal complaint with the Georgia Secretary of State's office the same week. He also quietly notified the county district attorney's office of the forensic findings. No press release, no announcement, just 2 formal notifications, documented, time-stamped, and on record. Then we waited, which is harder than it sounds. The HOA, meanwhile, had no idea any of this was happening. All they knew was that Garrett Hollis had gone quiet. No appearances at board meetings, no responses to Hargrove and Pell's follow-up letters. Just silence, and a single line relayed through Douglas. Mr. Hollis is aware of the matter and is consulting counsel. Silence, it turns out, is genuinely unnerving to people who are used to getting a reaction. Rochelle had built her entire playbook on provocation and response. Push the resident, collect the fine, move on. She didn't have a chapter for resident stops responding and retains a Savannah property attorney. So she did what people do when they can't get a reaction. She escalated. She filed for a property lien through the county courthouse. Standard HOA debt collection procedure. Perfectly legal if the underlying debt is valid, which, as we now knew, it was not. Douglas was ready for it. The same afternoon the lien filing hit the county system, he filed a lis pendens, a formal notice of pending litigation against the HOA, attaching it to the common area parcels. A lis pendens doesn't transfer ownership or block transactions outright, but it staples a bright red legal flag to a property's title history. Any buyer, lender, or title company pulling records will see it immediately. It signals, "This is contested, proceed with caution." Practical insight. A lis pendens is a public legal filing that warns the world a property is under active litigation. It's a powerful defensive tool for property owners, and it costs significantly less than most people assume. Any real estate attorney can file one, and its effect on the opposing party's financial options can be immediate. Rochelle found out about it the way she found out about most things, through her real estate agent, who called in something close to a panic. Because Rochelle, it turned out, had listed her own home 3 weeks earlier. She'd been planning to move to a larger property across the county, apparently expecting this whole business to resolve in her favor quickly and cleanly. The listing stalled. No buyer was going to touch a home whose HOA was flagged in active litigation on the common area parcels. Her exit strategy had just been nailed shut from the outside. I heard about this secondhand from Phyllis, who heard it from Rochelle's own real estate agent, who apparently needed to tell someone. Small towns. You can't buy confidentiality at the HOA gift shop. Meanwhile, I was having kitchen table conversations. Quiet ones. Coffee, old paper, the particular smell of manila folders that had been sitting in filing cabinets since the Clinton administration. I worked through the pre-2007 residents, one by one. There were 11 of us total who'd bought before the HOA incorporated. With Douglas's help, I checked the consent forms on file for each one. 9 out of 11 were forged. Walt Osgood's hands weren't entirely steady when Douglas showed him the analysis, comparing his filed signature to the real one, but his voice was level. So they never had the right to fine any of us, he said. Not once. That's correct, Douglas told him. Not once. Not a single dollar. Phyllis Kowalczyk, who had been running her own parallel investigation since that first board meeting, pulled out a folder she'd been building for months. She'd been reviewing the HOA's mandatory annual financial disclosures filed with the state, public documents available to anyone who knew where to look on the Secretary of State's portal. What she'd found: over $340,000 in assessment fees collected from the 9 affected pre-2007 properties since 2007. All of it collected under false authority. She'd also found something else. The HOA's reserve fund, nominally $280,000 set aside for community maintenance, had been drawn down to $14,000 over the past 4 years. The disbursement records were vague: administrative costs, consulting fees, legal review. Douglas subpoenaed the full financial records before the end of the week. The spreadsheet now had 11 tabs. Deanna had removed the question mark from possible fraud. Douglas called on a Thursday evening in early March. I was in my workshop, the smell of sawdust and machine oil hanging in the air the way it always does after a full day of cutting, working on a cabinet I'd been meaning to finish for 2 years. When his name came up on my phone, I set down my chisel and picked up. He'd been reviewing the original 1989 land grant in full. All 34 pages, including the attachments most people never read because they assume the main document covers everything. He'd found the non-encumbrance clause, which we already knew about, but buried in the attachments, in the language governing the disposition of common area parcels if the Whitmore tract were ever subdivided, he'd found something else: a reversionary interest clause. Harold Hollis had received his parcel directly from the Whitmore estate as part of a private sale that predated the full subdivision. As consideration for certain access easements Harold had granted the Whitmore estate during his lifetime, the original grant included a provision: if any homeowners association subsequently established on the Whitmore tract were to become legally void, due to fraud, dissolution, or structural invalidity, the common area parcels of that development would revert to the heirs of the original grantee, to the heirs of Harold Hollis, to me. I sat down on a sawhorse. Outside, the frogs were going in the creek. The shop light was casting that warm yellow glow that makes everything look slightly unreal. "Douglas," I said slowly, "are you telling me that if we prove the HOA was fraudulently incorporated, I own the streets?" "Not just the streets," he said. "Approximately 14.3 acres of common area. The clubhouse, the pool, the main entrance parcel, the green space along the back boundary. All of it reverts to you upon formal HOA dissolution." There was a long silence on the line. Not an uncomfortable one, the thinking kind. I want to be honest about what went through my mind in that moment, because it wasn't triumph, and it wasn't greed. It was something closer to the feeling you get when a calculation you've been running in your head finally resolves, and the answer is cleaner than you expected. I wasn't going to hold 14 acres of common area over 83 families who'd had nothing to do with Rochelle's fraud. That was never the point, but I was going to use it. "This isn't just a defense anymore," I said. "No," Douglas said. "It's a lever. The question is what you want to move with it." I thought about my father, about the cabin he built on this land in 1971, before there were street names or deed covenants or 47-page aesthetic standards documents. He was an electrician too, my father. He built things to last and expected to be left alone in the building of them. The idea that a woman in a polo shirt could retroactively claim jurisdiction over his land, could forge his son's name on a state document to do it, would have struck him as the kind of thing that required a specific and thorough response. "I want to punish Rochelle," I told Douglas, "and I want to build something better for the people who didn't deserve any of this." Another pause. Then Douglas said, "Then let's build the trap. Sometimes the people who try to bury you don't realize they've been standing on your foundation the whole time. Rochelle had spent a year trying to take my property. She'd handed me hers." Douglas brought in a second attorney, Vera Sondheim, 61 years old, property rights specialist out of Athens, Georgia, the kind of lawyer who communicates almost exclusively in declarative sentences and has a filing accuracy rate that makes opposing counsel visibly recalculate their confidence. She reviewed the reversionary clause, confirmed Douglas's analysis without hesitation, and then added a dimension neither of us had fully considered: the fraudulent signatures, submitted electronically to the state database as part of the 2007 incorporation filing, potentially constituted wire fraud under federal statute. She said this the way someone mentions the weather: calm, factual, devastating. She also identified the primary legal mechanism for the first phase of the plan: a quiet title action, a civil lawsuit filed in Superior Court asking a judge to formally declare, on the record, that the HOA has no lawful claim over my property, or the 9 other pre-2007 parcels with forged consent forms on file. Practical insight. A quiet title action is a civil proceeding asking a court to officially confirm who holds clear legal title to a property, free of competing claims. Any property owner can file one. Once granted, it creates a permanent court record establishing your rights, and it makes every subsequent claim against that property dramatically harder to pursue. Once a court confirmed quiet title across those 10 properties, every fine ever issued to them became legally void, and the HOA's fraudulent incorporation, built on forged consents it couldn't now defend, became challengeable at its foundation. The 9 affected homeowners formed an informal legal alliance, not a formal entity, just a shared defense fund and a shared purpose. Walt put in $2,000. Phyllis put in $3,500 and also volunteered to pull every public record the HOA had ever filed with the county, going back to incorporation. The others contributed what they could. Garrett covered the bulk of Douglas and Vera's fees. Douglas filed the quiet title action in Superior Court on a Wednesday morning. Simultaneously, he filed a separate civil complaint on behalf of all 9 homeowners for unjust enrichment. The legal argument that the HOA had collected money it had no legal right to collect and was therefore obligated to return it. Combined exposure, if both actions succeeded, approximately $340,000 in restitution, plus attorney's fees, plus potential punitive damages tied to the document fraud. Practical insight. Unjust enrichment is a civil cause of action that doesn't require proving malicious intent. It only requires showing that one party received a financial benefit they weren't entitled to, at another party's expense. It's been used successfully against HOAs in multiple states. But the real trap, the one with teeth, was the common area gambit. Here's how it worked, and it's worth slowing down to explain this properly. The reversionary clause only activated upon formal HOA dissolution or a court finding of legal invalidity. So Garrett's goal wasn't just to win his quiet title case. It was to survive Rochelle's counterattacks long enough to get a court judgment on the incorporation fraud, which would trigger dissolution, which would activate the reversionary clause, which would hand him the keys to 14 acres of community infrastructure. To accelerate that timeline, Douglas filed the reversionary clause as a recorded encumbrance against the HOA's common area parcels at the county recorder's office. Public record, permanent, visible to any title search. The effect was immediate. The moment that filing hit the county system, the HOA's ability to borrow against its reserve fund, which Rochelle had been quietly draining for years, evaporated. No lender would extend credit against property carrying a contested encumbrance. The HOA's financial pipeline, already running on fumes, was now sealed from the outside. I drove to the county recorder's office on a Wednesday morning to watch the filing go through. The office smells like old carpet and toner, and the specific brand of fluorescent light quiet that only exists in government buildings. A clerk stamped the document, assigned it a case number, and slid a copy across the counter without looking up. Routine transaction. End of the world for Rochelle Dunbar. I texted Douglas one word. Done. He texted back. Now we wait. I also sent a brief, neutral letter, on Douglas's letterhead, to all 84 homeowners in Herons Creek. No accusations, no predictions, just a note explaining that legal proceedings were underway, involving the HOA's 2007 incorporation documents, and that residents might want to review their own consent forms via the Georgia Secretary of State's Public Records portal. I included the exact search terms. Within 72 hours, 17 additional homeowners, including Trevor Bassett, had pulled their files. 17 more forged signatures staring back at them from a screen. Trevor called me directly, long pause on the line. I owe you an apology, he said. Save it for when this is over, I told him. Rochelle could feel the ground moving. She just couldn't see what was underneath it yet. Her first move was the smear. Starting in March 2022, she began circulating a narrative through the Herons Creek Facebook group, the Easter Committee meeting, and the informal social network of Front Porch Conversations that functions as neighborhood intelligence in communities like ours. The narrative was carefully worded, vague enough to deny, pointed enough to damage. Some homeowners seem more interested in legal maneuvers than community harmony. Posts about the importance of protecting property values from outside interference. A photo of my truck parked outside the county recorder's office, captioned with a raised eyebrow emoji and nothing else. She had taken that photo herself. The target was the newer residents, people who didn't know me well, whose anxiety about equity and comps made them susceptible to a villain story. And for a few weeks, it worked on some of them. The Facebook comments were something to behold. I read a few and decided my time was better spent doing literally anything else, including reorganizing my socket wrench collection by size. Then came the bribery attempt. Rochelle approached me through an intermediary, a neighbor named Clyde Purcell, who owed her favors of a nature that was never fully specified, but clearly involved a certain mutual understanding. Clyde showed up at my door on a Thursday evening with the offer. The HOA would drop the $1.2 million fine entirely, waive all previous citations, amend the CC and Rs to formally exclude my property from future assessments. All I had to do was withdraw the quiet title filing and sign a mutual non-disparagement agreement. I listened to the whole thing. Then I asked Clyde to tell Rochelle I'd respond in writing within 5 business days. I called Douglas before Clyde's car was out of the driveway. "Do not respond," Douglas said. "Let me respond." His written response was 3 sentences. "Mr. Hollis declines the settlement offer. Any further communication regarding the HOA's financial obligations should be directed to counsel. Mr. Hollis notes that the offer's existence confirms the HOA's awareness of its legal exposure, and this communication is being preserved as evidence." We never heard back from Clyde. Then, Rochelle tried something that crossed a different kind of line. Late April, I came home from a job site at 11 at night. Diesel smell on my jacket, work boots caked with red clay, the particular exhaustion that comes from a full day running conduit in a commercial build. I walked the perimeter out of habit before going inside, the way my father taught me to walk a property at the end of the day. My back fence had been cut. Not fallen, not rusted through. Cut. Clean, deliberate slices through 3 sections of chain link, spaced about 8 feet apart. Deanna had brought my 2 blue-tick hounds, Sully and Marge, inside earlier that evening because of a thunderstorm. Otherwise, they would have been in that yard. I photographed everything. Called the county sheriff, not the HOA, not a neighbor, the sheriff. Filed a criminal mischief report with an officer named Deputy Weston, who took notes with the focused attention of a man who had seen this specific category of escalation before and did not find it acceptable. The following weekend, I installed 4 trail cameras along my property perimeter. I positioned them carefully, tested the angles, and told exactly no one. Rochelle's final move in this sequence was her most reckless. In early May, she filed an anonymous complaint with the Georgia Department of Revenue, claiming I was operating an unlicensed commercial electrical business from my home address, in violation of HOA rules and county zoning. The state investigated. They found nothing. My business was properly licensed, fully bonded, and had never operated from my residential address. The complaint was baseless, but it created a paper trail. The anonymous complaint was logged in the state's system with a filing source. Through a public records request Vera filed for an unrelated procedural reason, we obtained the complaint document. The filing IP address traced to the HOA's administrative email system. Douglas added it to the civil complaint as evidence of tortious interference, deliberately attempting to damage a person's business or professional relationships through improper means. It's a civil cause of action that comes with its own damages calculation, separate from the property fraud claims. Practical insight. Tortious interference occurs when someone intentionally disrupts your business relationships or economic activity through wrongful conduct. Filing a false regulatory complaint against a competitor or adversary is a textbook example, and it's actionable in civil court even when the underlying complaint goes nowhere. Then, 2 weeks later, one of my trail cameras captured footage of Clyde Purcell walking along my back fence line at 1:47 in the morning, carrying wire cutters. I sent the file to Deputy Weston without comment. June 2022. 6 weeks out from the quiet title hearing, Garrett Hollis went completely, utterly, deliberately silent. No HOA meetings, no posts in the neighborhood group, no responses to Rochelle's letters. When a local radio station called, tipped off by one of the homeowners, I declined to comment and referred them to Douglas. Rochelle had expected a fight she could see coming. What she got instead was a man who had stopped reacting and started building. And that silence, I would later learn from multiple sources, made her more anxious than anything else I could have done. She had reason to be anxious. While I was keeping quiet, Douglas and Vera were doing the kind of legal preparation that doesn't make noise until it's supposed to. The financial forensics on the HOA's reserve fund had come back from the accountant Douglas had retained. The disbursement records, obtained through the subpoena Vera had filed in April, showed that approximately $187,000 in payments over 4 years had gone to a single LLC under the line item consulting fees. The LLC was called Dunbar Property Consultants, registered to Warren Dunbar, Rochelle's husband. Self-dealing, textbook self-dealing, documented across 4 years of disbursements, paid from a reserve fund that every homeowner in Herons Creek had contributed to. Vera added a RICO predicate to the filing list. She noted it the way a carpenter marks a cut line, with the calm precision of someone who has already decided the cut is going to be made. The neighborhood, meanwhile, had shifted in ways that were becoming visible on the surface. Trevor Bassett, the software contractor who'd stood up at that February meeting to defend the HOA, had quietly become one of the most operationally useful people in our coalition. He built a clean data visualization of the HOA's financial disbursements, a clear, color-coded breakdown showing the reserve fund's 4-year decline, alongside the spike in consulting fee payments to Dunbar Property Consultants. No legal argument, no accusations, just numbers laid out so that anyone with functioning eyes could see exactly what had happened. He posted it in the Herons Creek Facebook group on a Sunday morning. By noon, it had 340 reactions. Rochelle had blocked 17 people. The Georgia summer heat at midday is a physical weight. The air thick and syrupy, the asphalt shimmering, the cicadas in the oak trees generating the kind of sustained noise that makes you feel like the world is under pressure. It was somehow satisfying, on a day that hot, to watch a comment section melt down with the concentrated energy of 84 homeowners who had just understood, at the same moment, that their pool money was gone. Then Hargrove and Pell withdrew. The HOA's law firm filed a motion to withdraw from representation in late June. Stated reason: irreconcilable differences with the client regarding case strategy. What came out later, through a disclosure in the withdrawal filing, was that Rochelle had withheld the full scope of the document fraud from her own attorneys. They'd been making arguments in good faith that were built on a foundation she hadn't told them was rotten. No attorney stays in that building when the roof is going. The HOA scrambled. The first 2 firms they approached after Hargrove and Pell declined after reviewing the case file. A third, a solo practitioner from Augusta named Gerald Taft, one attorney and a paralegal, took the case for a flat fee paid up front from whatever remained in the reserve fund. $14,000 left in the fund. Gerald Taft's flat fee was reportedly $12,000. Douglas called me when he found out. Their new lawyer is one guy and a paralegal. That's not a defense, that's a deposition target. The night before the hearing, I was in my workshop again. Not working, just present. Sully and Marge were asleep on the concrete floor, breathing slow and easy the way old dogs do when everything is fine. The shop light was casting that warm yellow that makes an ordinary room look like a memory you'll want to keep. Deanna came in with 2 mugs of coffee. She sat next to me on a sawhorse without saying anything for a while. Then, "What do you want?" After. I thought about my father, about the cabin, about the fact that this piece of red Georgia dirt had been in my family for 50 years, and some woman in an embroidered polo had decided she could put $1 million lien on it over a mailbox. "Something that lasts," I said. "Something he would have liked." Deanna nodded. We sat there in the quiet. Coffee, sawdust, the distant sound of frogs from the creek, and let the evening be what it was. Tomorrow, everything was going to change. Superior Court of Barrow County, Georgia. July 14th, 2022, 9 o'clock in the morning. The courtroom was small and wood-paneled. the air conditioning fighting a losing battle against the Georgia summer. It smelled like old paper, floor polish, and the particular institutional seriousness of a room where things get decided. The gallery was packed. 23 Herons Creek homeowners had driven down, along with a reporter from the regional paper and a camera crew from an Atlanta TV affiliate that the Secretary of State's office investigation had apparently tipped off. I sat at the plaintiff's table in a clean button-down and my best work boots, the ones without clay on them. Douglas was beside me in a charcoal suit. Vera had a 4-inch binder and the focused, slightly terrifying stillness of someone who has been waiting for this specific morning for 4 months. Across the aisle, Gerald Taft, in a jacket that suggested he'd had a longer week than he'd planned for, and Rochelle Dunbar, still in the HOA polo. I want you to appreciate that detail. We were in Superior Court on the morning of a hearing that could dissolve her entire organization and expose her to criminal charges, and Rochelle Dunbar showed up in an embroidered polo with the HOA crest on the chest. Some people's sense of identity is located entirely in their authority, and when you remove the authority, there's nothing left to change into. The Honorable Constance Aldridge presided. 66 years old, 20 years on the bench, the kind of judge who has heard every variety of property dispute that human ingenuity can generate, and brings to each one the precise level of patience it has earned. She called the hearing to order with the quiet efficiency of a woman who has no interest in theater. Vera presented our case in clean, organized segments. The 1989 land grant, the non-encumbrance clause, the reversionary interest provision, the 2007 incorporation filing, the forensic document analysis confirming forged signatures on 9 consent forms, including mine, the financial records showing $187,000 in payments to Dunbar Property Consultants, the trail camera footage of Clyde Purcell at my fence line. She laid it out the way you lay out tools before a job. Methodical, complete, nothing extra. Gerald Taft's defense rested primarily on good faith reliance. The HOA had operated based on documents as filed and couldn't be held accountable for the validity of those documents. Vera's response was 2 sentences. Good faith reliance does not apply when the entity making the argument is the same entity that submitted the documents in question. The founding president of this HOA is sitting at that table. Judge Aldridge looked at Rochelle for a moment, then she looked at Gerald Taft. Counsel, can you produce an authenticated signature from Mr. Hollis, consenting to the HOA's jurisdiction over his property? Taft could not. He asked for a continuance to locate additional records. Judge Aldridge denied it. Discovery had been closed for 30 days. The case had been filed for 4 months. She granted the quiet title judgment in favor of Garrett Hollis. Then she kept going. Based on the forensic evidence of document fraud, she referred the matter to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation. She issued a preliminary finding that the HOA's 2007 incorporation was structurally compromised and invited any affected homeowner to file a joinder claim within 30 days. She noted, for the record, that the reversionary interest clause in the 1989 land grant was valid, enforceable, and would activate upon formal HOA dissolution. The gallery made noise. Not chaos, just the particular sound of a room full of people exhaling at the same moment. Rochelle stood up. This is not Ms. Dunbar. Judge Aldridge's voice was not raised. It didn't need to be. It had the weight of an institution behind it, and the patience of someone who had run out of patience at a very specific moment. You will address this court through counsel, or you will not address it at all. Rochelle sat down. In the gallery, Walt Osgood let out a long, slow breath, the sound of a man who had been holding something for a long time and had just set it down. Phyllis Kowalczyk closed her notepad, capped her pen, and put it in her purse with the small, deliberate precision of a woman crossing the last item off a very long list. On the courthouse steps, in the full assault of Georgia July heat, the Atlanta reporter asked me how I felt. I thought about it for a second. I feel like a man who painted his mailbox post the right color, I said. It led their segment that evening. Rochelle left through a side door. She didn't speak to anyone. She was still wearing the polo. The next 4 months were less dramatic and more satisfying than anything that came before them. The HOA dissolved by court order in November 2022. The district attorney's office charged Rochelle Dunbar with 3 counts of filing fraudulent public documents and 1 count of wire fraud related to the electronic submission of forged consent forms. Warren Dunbar faced a separate civil action for the self-dealing LLC payments, a case that settled before trial for a number I'm not allowed to disclose, but that Deanna logged in the spreadsheet under a tab she titled simply, "Worth It." Clyde Purcell pleaded guilty to criminal mischief and was sentenced to community service and restitution. Hargrove and Pell's professional liability insurer, having reviewed the situation and correctly determined that a prolonged legal fight would cost more than a settlement, agreed to a payment to the 9 affected homeowners. Combined with the HOA's remaining assets, the total restitution came to $312,000, distributed across the group. Gerald Taft, to his credit, sent Douglas a handwritten note that read simply, "Well done." Lawyers respect the work, even when they're on the other side of it. Now, what to do with 14 acres? I want to be honest. The reversionary clause giving me the common areas was a legal instrument, not a lottery ticket. I never wanted a pool. I never wanted a clubhouse. I wanted to be left alone on my own land. So the question of what to do with the common areas was, from the beginning, a community question, not mine alone to answer. I convened a meeting, not in anyone's sunroom, not at a folding table with 4 chairs on one side and 12 on the other. I rented the pavilion at the county park and set up round tables. No hierarchy, no assigned seating. Deanna made 4 pans of peach cobbler. The smell of warm peaches and brown sugar brought people in from the parking lot before I'd even called the meeting to order. I proposed a community land trust, a nonprofit structure in which the 14.3 acres of common area would be transferred from my personal ownership to a trust governed by an elected board representing all 84 homeowners, with mandatory term limits and full financial transparency requirements built into the governing documents. Practical insight. A community land trust is a real, widely used legal structure that removes land from the speculative real estate market and places it under permanent community stewardship. It's used in hundreds of American cities and towns. Any community can form one, and the governing documents can be specifically tailored to prevent the kind of self-dealing that destroyed the previous structure. The vote was 79-5. Trevor Bassett was elected to the trust's first board. Phyllis Kowalczyk became treasurer, a role she accepted with the quiet satisfaction of someone returning to their natural habitat. Walt Osgood volunteered to maintain the green space trails with a riding mower he'd spent the better part of the year rebuilding in his garage, which honestly seemed like the outcome he'd been working toward all along. There was one more thing. The restitution money paid directly to me, approximately $47,000 after legal fees, went into a new fund. The Harold Hollis Memorial Trades Scholarship, administered through the county vocational school, awarded annually to a graduating senior pursuing a career in the skilled trades. Electrical, plumbing, HVAC. The work that keeps the world running while everyone else argues about mailbox colors. My father poured concrete on that land in 1971 and never asked anyone's permission to build something that lasted. The scholarship felt like the right continuation of that. The first recipient was announced the following spring. A 17-year-old from the county named Darnell Price, who wanted to be an electrician. When I handed him the check at the vocational school's spring ceremony, I shook his hand and told him the only thing worth telling: learn to read your deed. Herons Creek Estates is quieter now. The pool is open. The trails are maintained. The roads got repaved by a community assessment that every homeowner voted on, with the budget posted publicly where anyone can read it. There is no polo. There is no 47-page document. There is a mailbox policy that fits on one page and ends with 3 words: mind your own business.
You know what stayed with me about Gary's story? It's not the number. The $1.2 million over a mailbox process. Yeah, that one stick. It's how long he waited. Rochelle was filing liens, sending certified letters through a law firm, commissioning surveys. And Garrett was sitting at the kitchen table reading a 34-year-old land grant that most people would stuck in a drawer and forgotten about. That's the whole thing. He didn't match her energy, didn't show up to meetings to make speeches, just got quiet, got organized, and let her keep pushing until she puts herself somewhere she couldn't walk back from. I've looked at a lot of this HOA situation. And the ones that go badly for the homeowner almost always follow the same pattern. Somebody gets a letter, gets angry, reacts fast, and the HOA use that reaction against them. That's the whole playbook. Garrett just didn't give them that. Anyway, I'm curious, have you ever had something like this land on your doorstep? Doesn't have to be $1 million fine. Just that feeling of someone with a little bit of authority deciding to make your life difficult. How you handle it? Drop it below. If you are new here, this channel exists because these stories are not rare. We keep covering them. Subscribe if you want to be here for the next one. And if you know someone dealing with this right now, send it to them. See you on the next one.